Everyone, welcome. My name is MJ Prestridge. Welcome to another P3D video. Today we're having a look at the settings I use for 5.2 and how to properly set up your 5.2 to get the best performance out of it. Now, a little disclaimer here. I'm not trying to say that this is the only way it can be done. Many people will probably disagree with this approach or have their own opinion on it. The great thing about P3D is it's so versatile and that it's used in many different ways. But the single way that everybody uses it is to achieve a smooth flight without screen tearing or jitters or stutters or anything like that. So there is a correct way to set up your P3D in line with your monitor and your graphics card. Now, I have done previous videos on that, and that information hasn't changed really. So I'll put the link down below. Go check that out. But 5.2 has changed quite considerably from 5.1. So any guides or videos previously for 5.1 or 5.0 really do not apply to 5.2 because Lockheed Martin have made some great steps moving forward for 5.2 in terms of optimization for the CPU and the way it handles the sim, for the VRAM and how it's managed, and for the memory usage that it uses. So it really does take better advantage of anyone's hardware now. And a second disclaimer is I don't use AMD at all. I only use NVIDIA with P3D. P3D is still essentially FSX under the hood, and so that was made based on the hardware of an NVIDIA and Intel hardware. So it's optimized mainly to take advantage of the way that this hardware works. Now, AMD are also making great steps forward in optimizing their hardware so P3D can take good advantage of it. But in my personal opinion, NVIDIA and Intel are still, for optimization in terms of how it utilizes the software or how the software utilizes the hardware, is the better way to go. Many will disagree, saying AMD or Radeon or whatever is better, but this is just my opinion of how I run my sim, and I have absolutely perfect performance, beautiful visuals, and you'll see that in the forthcoming videos. So let's get straight into it. Now, like I said before, moving forward, there's multiple ways you can use your sim depending on what kind of pilot you are. If you are a low 3,000 feet flying in a Cessna or a high flying 40,000 feet in a Jumbo, you're going to utilize your settings a lot differently. And there is no real, I feel, one setting for everything to get the best out of your P3D. And really, if you don't know what to do with P3D in terms of the settings, you really want to try and optimize your P3D to get the best visuals versus performance. If you try and just get the best visuals, it will hamper your performance. You'll get stutters, you'll get lag, you'll get problems. If you try and tune it just for performance, then you're gonna look around and go, where's my sim? It just looks rubbish. So you want to try and strike a fine balance between the two. So for me, the best way that I've always set up my sim is to line the graphics card, the monitor, and the sim in one. And like I said, there's a video I'll link down below. Go watch that. The information in there is still relevant to the way you set up your sim. Basically, you want to try and lock your frame rate to a single number. For me, it's 40, but for you, depending on your monitor, you might have it differently. So anyway, looking at the display section first, I highly recommend the resolution matching your monitor. Now, for me, in my 1080 Ti graphics card, unfortunately, that doesn't handle 4K that well at 4K. So I set it to really 2K, and it's then upscaled to 4K, and it works a lot better in performance than it would if I actually set this all the way to 3840, which is the monitor resolution. So one thing I definitely recommend using is profiles for your sim. Depending on what you're going to be doing, moving forward. So let's get straight into it. Now, first screen, the application screen, a lot of this really won't make any difference on performance for your sim. I do recommend the PNG screenshot. That's the highest quality, and I do recommend unticking enable content error reporting, enable avatar mode, enable panel serialization, and use system time for default scenario, and pause on task switch. Now, the pause on task switch, if you click off your screen, and most simmers do have multiple screens, your sim will pause unless you untick that button. So if you're finding that your sim is pausing during flight, it's because you've got this box ticked. I would recommend also prompting on exit as well as a backup in case you accidentally click exit and you didn't mean to. Then have a backup so it will actually prompt you as well, did you mean to do this? I also recommend disabling the enable content error reporting, otherwise you're going to get a box that pops up every single time when you close your sim down. And to be honest, the error reporting for content isn't as crucial as the error reporting for scenario. So keep that one ticked. A lot of this is going to be basic personal preference though, I feel. Moving on to the information tab, again, there's a lot of performance that you can save here if you untick a few things. Vehicle labels, for instance, won't be rendered in the world if you just disable the entire lot. The primary info text that appears in the top right corner, I untick that, and I only keep ticked the ones that you see. Now, you still will get chase plane info at the top right corner. Now, I'm going to be going in the next video all through my P3D CFG because I have slightly tweaked it. So I will show you how you can disable, but the entry is in your CFG. You just turn true to false, and it gets rid of that chase plane writing, and you can also tune the writing to any color you want as well. I'll show you how to do that as well. Down here, if you untick user tips and scenario captions, you will actually save some performance. Every time you're in your cockpit and little things pop up, sometimes it's nice to have this little pop-up like this here, but other times it can just be annoying. So untick these two definitely, and if you want to, get rid of the tooltips in the cockpit as well, you can, although I keep it just because, I feel it's handy sometimes. The air traffic control, unless you're using another system like I use ProATC or VATSIM, then untick and get rid of all of the default stuff. Otherwise, it will pop up, and it will still pop up even though all this is unticked unless you untick the voice as well. Now, it does say enable to a headset for voice communications. That really is a bit confusing because even with this unticked, you can still talk on VATSIM through headset communications. I have a separate microphone though, so that's probably why it still works for me. If you have a headset to a microphone to your headset, maybe that's what it's referring to, but it still works on VATSIM with me, even though I've unticked that. And personal preference really for volume levels, I feel. In terms of the sound devices here, I really highly recommend you going into your Windows sound configuration here and disabling anything that you do not use. When P3D is going to assign your sound, if you've clicked default primary playback device and you have multiple ones here, it is supposed to click to your default device, but this can actually change sometimes with Windows updates. So disable everything else and then there's no confusion whatsoever. So I literally only have the one option to choose from in each of these, and I actually select them as well, so there's absolutely no confusion in my sim for the sound. Moving on to traffic. Now in 5.1, P3D, Lockheed Martin tuned the road traffic a lot to make it better perform, and in 5.2 the whole sim performs better and is utilized by the hardware a lot better. So truly ramp up your road vehicles and you will have another layer of immersion. I personally use Chris Bell's road traffic pack, and he recommends a setting of 45. I keep mine at 39 because even at that level you see a lot of traffic and it's really immersive, especially on the nights when you're coming into land and you just see those little ants crawling along the motorways. It is really cool, to be honest. And it's another layer of immersion. And in 5.2, you can definitely get away with more usage of your sim now. I use an add-on called Global Ship AI Traffic as well. Now that only means that I have to have a ships and ferries setting of 6% or more. I set it to 10 and turn leisure boats off. I still get leisure boats in the sim. And all over the world, I get all the boats that I've ever wanted. Airline traffic density. Now, if I'm on VATSIM, I'll put it to 50%, and if I'm not using VATSIM, I'll turn it up to 100%, as I use the AIG traffic system. I'll link that video down below as well. I'm not that bothered about seeing general aviation or anything like that, so I just turn that off completely. Airport vehicle density. Now, turning this off, airport developers still put traffic stuff into their sim, into their add-on, and it's still seen in the sim even though I have mine set to none. So you can actually get away with saving a little bit of performance on your default sort of airport vehicle stuff if your add-on airport already comes with that. So turn this off and you will save a little bit of performance. Realism, this is totally your call of what you want to use. This is what I use. Ignore the crashes completely. Turn off any auto this or auto that, and this is exactly what I use. So moving back to the display section, I turn off FXAA. I have quite low AA settings. I actually recommend having higher AA settings in Windows 10 if you're in the full screen mode. There is a bit of an issue at the moment with anti-aliasing. I personally don't care because I have my head in the cockpit, and my anti-aliasing for my cockpit is fine. So I don't really need to see off to the horizon line when I'm at, like, say 40,000 feet, because I'm looking at the instruments in my cockpit. So I tune down my anti-aliasing because this is a massive performance hit for your CPU and your GPU for the sim. So getting away with as little sort of AA as you can is beneficial, but if it does bother you, then turn it up to its maximum setting currently. I turn off VSync and I enable unlimited on the frame rate because I lock my frame rate in my GPU. I lock it to 40 to give me a little bit of overhead. It tends to kind of undervalue sometimes, especially if you suddenly come into an airport. I used to say 33 in the GPU. I haven't done that for months, to be honest, because again, you could get 33 when you're up 30,000 feet, but then as you come into land, it suddenly will decrease down to say 25 briefly, and then you'll get stutters. So a way to combat that is to overshoot your 33 to 40, and then it will come down to 33 on an approach coming in. I also turn off the variable refresh rate because I do lock my frame rate and I don't have a G-Sync monitor. But if you do have a G-Sync or FreeSync monitor, check variable refresh rate and it will try its best to maintain a steady refresh rate for your monitor. I untick wide view aspect ratio as well, even though I am carrying, got a widescreen monitor, but I use Chase Plane, and I believe they actually say that you need to untick this. Make sure that map VC panels are ticked, otherwise you will get blurry cockpit textures. If you have an 8 gig graphics card or higher, untick dynamic texture streaming. All this does is lower the VRAM by displaying lower resolution textures when it can, rather than the higher resolution textures in order to save VRAM. If you have an 8 gig or a 10 gig or an 11 gig GPU or plus, then you don't need the dynamic texture streaming, and your textures will never go blurry or never seem to be blurry. If you do tick this and you're on a 6 gig or even possibly an 8 gig, I would recommend ticking this, because your VRAM, even though it's been optimized for 5.2, could increase to a crash if you hit a heavy airport, say Heathrow, in a PMDG aircraft that is a very heavy intensive aircraft. You want to at least try and lighten the load with the scenery, and so dynamic texture streaming will help you out. The texture resolution, you want to match this value with whatever resolution setting close as possible that you can in here. If you have a, for say instance, 1080p monitor, then you only need to select the medium textures. You're not going to see any difference by selecting high or ultra. So, you know, save some performance, and you can utilize that saved performance in adding more scenery. If you match it as closely as possible to the texture, to the monitor, you don't need to ramp up your AA settings as much. You'll still get good anti-aliasing close to the avatar, and everything will still look okay. But if you are concerned with further out to the distance anti-aliasing, then you can increase these settings and it will increase that level of anti-aliasing further out. In the world setting now, I definitely recommend ticking use high resolution terrain textures. Unless you're flying at night, you don't need to, because you won't see any of this. Now, a lot of this here is going to change based on what profile you selected, based on what type of flight you're going to do. Now, to be honest, if I went through and talked about each type of profile, this could be a very lengthy video. Let's not make a lengthy video, and I will save if you're flying commercial airliners, what's the best settings? If you're flying low Cessna 3000 feet or lower planes, what are the best settings? I'll do 2 different videos pertaining to those settings, so you can think of it as part 2 and part 3 of a trilogy. And so for this video, we won't be talking about these 2 bits here. We will leave that for those next 2 videos coming soon. In the water and bathymetry section, I untick enable bathymetry. Unless you're flying underwater, you're never going to see the points of elevation that the sim will render if you have it enabled. You're flying in the sky, you're not flying underwater, so there's no need to see the mountains underneath the water. There's no need for that information to be rendered in the sim as you fly over it. So untick it, and it will save you a whole load of CPU calculations for your sim. Reflections now. Reflections are a bit strange because on the terrain, the buildings and the sim objects, sometimes these are actually put into the models by the developer, and unticking these anyway, you will still get reflections on those items. So the only 2 reflections that I actually use are cloud and user vehicle, and that is it. I still see sim objects, terrain, and building reflections because, again, the add-on developer bakes them in and they're a part of the model, so they get shown regardless if this is ticked or unticked. So untick all this and the default stuff won't show through. Special effects I have ramped up to high. This really doesn't have too much of a hit for anything. This is really more for little things, but it very low performance hits, so you can actually get away with high if you're on like a 6 or 8 gig GPU, or if you're clocking in say 3 gigahertz, then turn these down to the midpoint. But if you've got a 4 gigahertz CPU going, or if you're on a 8 gig plus or a 10 gig plus card, then you can set these to high and enjoy those visuals. Now, the True Sky section. The best way I have found to utilize this is to your own personal preference. My personal preference is enhanced atmospherics, turning the volumetric clouds off during the night times and turning them on during the day to medium. If you set it to ultra, you're going to get a bit of an FPS bite, but setting it to medium now. If you really do like the Rex clouds or the active sky clouds or the colors that they bring as well, if you turn this off, it will activate those in your sim, as well as having the enhanced atmospherics lighting for everywhere in your sim. So you kind of get the best of both worlds, which is a beautiful feature. Thank you, Lockheed Martin, for bringing it in and putting it in. In fact, my Discord, actually, we got together, I think it was last year, or no, early this year, and we sent off a load of requests of features to Lockheed Martin for future uses, and lo and behold, the use of legacy clouds and True Sky combined was actually one of those suggestions. If it was because of that list or not, I have no idea, but I'm glad to see that that is a feature in 5.2. It definitely called for by the fans. Volumetric fog is ticked by default, and there is absolutely no way to cheat this. If you do it, untick it in the CFG file, it will just re-enable once you tick enhanced atmospherics, and if you try and do it afterwards, it just won't disable. This is locked on if you're using enhanced atmospherics. Ticking it off means you can actually have it on or off. I have always used volumetric fog off in version 5.1 just because I don't think it was there yet with the rendering of it. Luckily in 5.2 it's rendered a little bit better, but I still prefer it turned off. The fact that it's locked on, a little bit of a bite, but at the end of the day, what's more important, the use of enhanced atmospherics with or without volumetric clouds, or the appearance of volumetric fog, which can be turned off in your weather engine? I recommend having all the other options ticked except for amortize the clouds. It's an experimental feature. It's like a beta version. It basically reduces the quality of the clouds, but increases the fidelity look of them. But if you whip your camera to left and right quickly, you'll see a very jarring effect, which they will improve in future versions. So for now, I just leave that unticked. And if you have a weather engine, then you can slide all this down, and that weather engine will sort out this section of your sim anyway. So that's this section. The lighting, again, this is kind of like personal preference. Bloom, I recommend turning all the way down to like 0.10, and I have my brightness and saturation set to 1. And I usually, actually, depending on what profile I'm using, I think I had a nighttime profile set there, will be dependent on what tick boxes I have here. So if I'm flying at night, everything gets ticked off because you don't see shadows at night. But if you're flying at daytime and you want to see shadows, then whack everything on except for particles and no shadow flagged content. Now, in a future video, I will show you my P3D CFG and a nice little trick that you can do. And I'll put my CFG file in my Discord when that video comes out, how you can actually optimize your shadows and how they're rendered and still have this setting set to high. I would actually recommend tuning this down to low, because shadow quality really just means what's your texture resolution. You can actually set that in your CFG and still have low quality set here, and it would impact the sim's performance less. There is kind of a cheat with shadows, which again I'll explain in a future video. So you can actually have everything ticked here and still get the same performance with the little cheat that I'm going to put in a future video. Auto exposure, I personally have it turned on. It's totally your call if you turn it on or off. If you leave it on, you will get that brightening and dimming effect as you move your camera around. Some people don't like it. If you don't, turn it off. If you don't have a HDR monitor, then turn off enable HDR lighting. If you do have a HDR monitor, then make sure this is ticked. Otherwise, you will get a difference of luminance on your screen. And so things might appear overly dark or overly bright, and you'll be like, ooh, this looks a bit weird. Dynamic lighting, I leave on, but I leave the reflections off. Again, these are things that are baked into models sometimes, so you still will get dynamic reflections if you have this switched to off. I untick display lens flare because we don't have glass eyes. It's a bit unrealistic. The rest of these are your personal preference, but the one thing I would say is key assignments. Once you come into here, delete every assignment, okay, and rebind everything yourself to your hardware. You will not have issues then with your hardware in your sim, and then save your file, okay, as an XML file. So that way in the future when you update, you just import your controls and boom, everything is back to the way it was. Or if you do have an issue of control, you can just quickly re-import your files in case something has changed, and boom, problem solved. So If there's anything I missed in this video, please feel free in the comments to tell me or offer some constructive feedback for if there's anything else in the future you wish me to cover. Moving forward, I really won't be doing tutorial videos. I will offer that advice in the flights that I do on this channel. So, you know, all my videos of flight will offer tutorial talks within those flights. So I still am kind of doing them, but I'm not doing them as a straight out tutorial video. I will offer my settings and my CFG files in videos in the future moving forward. And yes, I am working on a TrueSky 5.2. Thank you so much for watching this. Please join my Discord down below to get any files that I've mentioned in this video, and I shall see you in the next one. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.